All right, welcome to this Canadian Patriot podcast. For those who have not yet watched the interview that I had done, or it was more of a class by Sam Labriere, go to the description box and check it out because that's sort of a preamble, a part one of this two-part session. And you'll have noted that if you watch that episode dealing with McKinley and the deep state foreign directed apparatus that transformed the United States from a legitimate republic into losing its soul, or a long, dark journey towards increasingly losing its soul that began really with the figure of Teddy Roosevelt and all of those figures who came in like a toxic poison into power around the figure of McKinley, who's too often given the full blame for the evil done in the name of his enemies. And so that was a really good part one. Many people might have, or actually have written to me already who have watched it, saying they were confused why Anton Chaitkin was there at the very beginning of the video and why I announced that Anton Chaitkin would be speaking, but he never spoke. Now, the reason for that, as I explained at the end of the Sam Labriere presentation, is that Anton's internet crashed and we couldn't follow through as hoped. However, things are back in order, and Anton has agreed to devote his time again to actually picking up the torch. And I like it that we're doing it this way as two separate standalone videos, tackling the aspects of what came in before and during McKinley's administration, and especially afterwards, especially centering around the figure of Teddy, who's lionized in many corridors of people who think of themselves as patriots today. And keep in mind, the study of the history is about looking and understanding the present situation and looking at the future with a better understanding of what traps got us to self-sabotage so many times by being stupid and being ignorant about the real nature of America's true enemies. So no one is better equipped to handle this than the great historian Anton himself, who's written many books about this, which are also available in the description box under this video. And Anton, thank you for taking the time. And I'm just going to leave the stage to you to just develop whatever you want to develop as a second part to Sam's presentation.
All right, thanks, Matt. And we should have a little bit of a discussion, about this. The 1898 war with Spain to grab Spain's colonies, Cuba and the Philippines, was a horrible turning point in the United States, away from its philosophy, its founding ideals, its nationalism, and its republic character as a republic, and towards aligning itself, or being aligned from the top, with the British Empire. It's a constant enemy, the enemy of our republic to this day. There were terrible consequences for the world as a result of not just this war against Spain. The war itself, that little war, was part of a three-step coup d'etat against the United States government and nation. The central figure of the coup d'etat was the president who came in to replace William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt. And I'm going to discuss that coup in a few minutes. The world is now in grave danger from the consequences of that coup d'etat and that turn of our country. I want to go through the wars very quickly, just boom, 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 to situate this war and to show something about the turning point just from the character of the wars. So you can divide the first 7 wars of our country's history, from the time of the Revolution up to the end of World War III. You can divide those 7 wars into 3 sets. The first set was the American Revolutionary War, where Britain invaded its colonies who were in a state of rebellion. And we had a defensive struggle and declared our independence and established a nation It was weak, and we were under attack constantly still from the bullying empire. And we had another war with Britain, the second war for independence, to maintain that independence, called the War of 1812, from 1812 to 1814. Then, after a period of nationalism where we developed our first phase of industrialization, 1820s into the 30s, the slave owners, the most increasingly radical of the slave owners, anti-national slave owners, established a hegemony within our country in alignment with the British Empire. I've gone through that extensively in my work and in volume 1, especially of the new book, Who We Are. This brought on 3 wars. The first was the so-called Mexican War, where the U.S. invaded Mexico in 1846 for the purpose of really spreading slavery and starting to overwhelm the North. And out of that war, which was led by slave owners and criticized by people like Abraham Lincoln in Congress, out of that war, there was a series of private wars, which I'm not including as one of the 7 wars, but I characterize the whole set of them as the Southern Empire Project, where Southern pirates, in a sense, trying to spread slavery, tried to create a new empire aligned with the British Empire, but separate from the British Empire, and seeking the backing all the time of the British. And
Would you
this
would you
was,
categorize like the William Walker
yes, these
takeover
are
of
well,
okay,
I'll tell you exactly what it
okay,
was. William
all right.
Walker was an adventurer who invaded Central America and Mexico, trying to set up slave states there, and also Cuba. This was the main project, was the repeated attempts to invade Cuba. One of the people arrested in 1854 in this intended slave empire, arrested in Havana, Cuba, was a man named James D. Bullock, Bulloch, who was to be the uncle of Theodore Roosevelt. And we'll get back to that. But this is the tradition in the Roosevelt family, and that goes back to this Southern slave empire. Now, the idea of this empire was later known in some ways as the empire dream of the Knights of the Golden Circle. And these were secessionists trying to set up a huge empire all the way down to South America that would be slave territory, including the U.S. West, to overwhelm and destroy the American Republic. And at length, this led to the second war of this set, which we know as the U.S. Civil War. The same characters, traitors, started a war against the United States, which we call the Civil War.
Can I just quickly
Yeah,
show an image of the
go ahead.
okay, so this is a surviving document of the first phase of the planned Empire of the Golden Circle for those who don't know. And the idea was to have what Anton is talking about, a slave empire centered around the island of Cuba as a new sort of
That's
base
right.
of power projection, featuring all of that territory in gold, which would expand. That would be the starting point, and the idea would be to then
Yeah.
expand it beyond those limits.
All
So
right.
just so people know what it actually looks like.
So understand that in those days, 1846, when this 1850s, when this was going on, uh, Cuba was a Spanish colony of the largely moribund Empire of Spain. Mexico was an independent country, and the U.S. West was territories, not part of the the states represented in Congress, except for California. Uh, so anyway, this was the project that Lincoln had to face up against, and this led to the Civil War. So then, after the Civil War, we have a second phase of nationalist control under Lincoln and his allies. He was assassinated at the end of the war, but we kept going. It wasn't a successful coup d'etat. They intended to wipe out the whole government. People were tried by the government for the attempted assassination of president, vice president. General Grant was supposed to be assassinated, the whole thing, and the
Oh
Secretary
yeah.
of State was attacked.
Really,
Unsuccessful coup d'etat.
General Grant was also targeted on that list of
Yes, but he
assassination.
wasn't
Oh,
at the theater, the place where he
oh,
was scheduled to go there with Lincoln.
oh, I didn't know.
Anyway, so now, we continued Lincoln's policies, and I showed in volume 2 that there was a set of men. Henry Adams, the grandson of John Quincy Adams, was in this enemy set who were affiliated with the British Empire. They burned with ambition to change the United States into a partner with the British, whom this group viewed as more more successful, more proper, with better manners, and more safe for the upper classes, and for an oligarchy of useless, parasitical bankers that they were part of, and importers, slave owners, whatever. So Henry Adams was part of this. It was a group that said, we do not want Lincoln's outlook and policies to continue after his presidency. And so the part of this was also involved the murder of President Lincoln. So then you get into the third set, which is the war against Spain in 1898, to renew the project of attacking Cuba, taking over Cuba, expanding this to other Spanish. Remember, this was the Southern Project of Traitors. The leader of the whole project, Quitman, was arrested by President Zachary Taylor back in 1853, I guess it was, or no, it wouldn't have been 51, when Taylor was president, and so this was known at the time as treason.
Can I ask you, when President Taylor, who was assassinated, I think later that year, when he arrested, or maybe it was 1852, he was killed, or died of eating too many cherries in
51, yeah. Go ahead.
51, right? Well, what was the reason for his arresting of Quitman? Was it because of Quitman was
Quitman
caught?
was because he was trying to recruit Americans against our laws, neutrality and other laws, to become mercenary soldiers based from the USA, from Mississippi, to invade the territory, Cuba, of a country with which we were at peace, Spain, and to embroil us in a whole set of European imperial problems, which George Washington and all of our best leaders always said we do not want to do. It wasn't because we had nothing to do with all these other countries. It wasn't isolationism. That's wrong.
Yeah.
It was explicitly not to become ourselves part of the imperial system. We wanted to have our own industries. You needed tariffs, and you needed to be free of imperial control of your country. We did not want to have armies and navies roaming around the world looking for wars, or looking for people that were defying us, and we needed to slap them down. That's just the excuses used by empires to do dirt to their own people as well as the foreign countries. So this is 1898. With this coup d'etat, you get this war against Spain, grabbing of Philippines and Cuba. This led to an alignment with Britain, and I'll get to what was going on here. This was not something that the public even knew about in the depth of it, let alone would ever have approved of. This led to the setting up of World War I, jointly by President Teddy Roosevelt and King Edward VII, who died before the war began, that he had organized. And then this group of American elite, particularly bankers, along with other elements of this Anglo-American group here, working directly with the British, organized the Hitler Project to get another world war. The whole idea of this was I'll get to it later, but it had to do with completely wiping out American influence in the world. So who are these people? Let's look at Teddy Roosevelt. He had very close personal and family ties with the British elite through his father and his father's friends, including the American affiliates of the Bering Bank, which is the Far Eastern Opium Bank, going all the way back to the beginning of the opium issue for the East India Company. It's the correlate of the East India Company. So this is as he grows up, and Teddy Roosevelt, born in 1858, he's born in New York City. He goes repeatedly to England. He has English friends of the highest rank, and this blossoms well before his presidency, to where he's working directly with the prime minister, with the colonial apparatus, and then with the king directly, although he never met him personally. On his mother's side, his mother was Martha. Maddie was born in Georgia. She may be the model for the character who's the owner of the plantation in the Gone with the Wind story, Margaret Mitchell's novel turned into the movie. And in any case, she was a Southern belle, and she was, defiantly pro-Confederacy. Her brother was James D. Bullock, the man that was arrested down in Cuba in 1854, and part of the Southern Empire Project. And during the Civil War, he rose in the stature among the conspirators for the secession, to the point where he was made the Southern representative in England, responsible for conducting the Secret Service of the Confederacy for basically a single purpose, and that was to organize the British construction of a navy for the Confederacy to make war on the United States with. And this occurred. They built a limited number of ships. They were very good ships, very effective warships, and eliminated perhaps half of the U.S. commercial fleet during the Civil War. He was as the liaison for the Confederate Secret Service in England. He also sent $30,000, a large amount at that time, over to Canada to pay the team that John Wilkes Booth met with in Montreal, that was assigned to, as the historians say, kidnap and hold for ransom President Abraham Lincoln. And that's the cover story. I mean, how are you going to kidnap an American president in the middle of a war without killing him, without violence? That doesn't make any sense, right?
Mhm.
But that's what they recorded, in their conversations with the Southern military and so forth. Um, Teddy Roosevelt, after the deed was done and Lincoln had been shot to death in 1865 by Booth, and his co-conspirators attacked the other people, particularly Seward. After this, um, the uncle Bullock was not given amnesty by the President Johnson, and he remained in exile in England. Is buried there, and claimed that he didn't care, that he loved England more, really, that he really hated the U.S. government, uh, and so. Um, but Teddy Roosevelt went over there when this guy was living there, and Teddy Roosevelt edited the papers of his uncle. You can read that. There's a very well documented biography, the only existent biography of Bullock, that you can read it. I forget the name of it. I have it footnoted heavily in this volume, volume 2 of Who We Are. But he edited the papers to especially remove references to the money that went uh, to the assassination project against President Lincoln. Uh, and he revered Uncle James Bullock as his idol for the rest of his life. Every biography of Teddy Roosevelt says the same thing about it, and you can see it from his actions and from his words. He was taught strategy, particularly for his first book, Teddy Roosevelt's first book on the history of the War of 1812. What was that war about? Well, it was our second war of independence. What was the philosophical differences between the empire and the United States? Well, mainly, it's mostly about tactics, isn't it? Tactics, and this is the drawback of people who are so-called military historians or military buffs. And if they're real military historians, then they're dealing with the philosophy of the encounter, right? Not just of a philosophy of battle, but the philosophy of the war, of the conflict.
Yeah,
What's
yeah,
it
like
about, right?
the deeper
Yeah,
why, capital
yeah.
W. Why did it
Right.
happen?
And
What was right?
otherwise, what's the
Yeah.
point? Otherwise, it's just murder, right? If you don't have that philosophical difference and you're not fighting for something worthwhile, you are committing murder.
Right.
So a war of aggression for bad purposes is murder, plain and simple. You can't say, well, oh, it's a war, and therefore it's not the same rules as killing somebody in civilian society. I'm sorry, that's not true. By
So you're saying
any
that's the Teddy Roosevelt approach in his book on the War of 1812 is to deal with tactics and to deal with the
he
individual
might deal,
battles, but not really with the
I don't
broader
remember,
questions.
he
Hmm.
might deal with some differences between them, but he's not going to go into what this history is. His uncle was the leading traitor against our country of the world at that time. And going back to this project that preceded the Civil War, this Southern Empire project that led to the Civil War. That's the problem. He's not going to deal with that. He doesn't talk about his uncle in the book. He doesn't want people to know about his relationship to this notorious traitor. People in the public did not know about the assassination money, but they knew that only came to light later when the archives are available and could be searched in an effective way and put a lot of things put together by the Bullock biographers. But anyway, so Teddy Roosevelt uh, reveres the British Empire as as the rightful ruler by the English speaking race over backward people not white and not English speaking. Um, and does that mean that he never had a critical tone towards England? No, or towards the empire. No, his tone was the British Empire is daddy. I am the new son that is entitled to the respect of daddy because I'm going to join him in our now joint battle to take over the world for us and our other members of our family, who are also white and English speaking, wherever they are. The South Africa, Australia, what have you. So that's the attitude, but it's based on the earlier experience of the earlier model of the Southern slave empire. Jefferson Davis and these other conspirators, and he was in this, he's not just a secessionist, he's in this earlier thing, the Cuba Project and so forth. He was offered head of the expedition to invade Cuba. He turned it down. So, but these people wanted to have the same relationship with Britain. They were all for free trade. They were all white. They were all going to have an empire. And the British Empire is their model. But they wanted to have the respect of daddy over there in London and the king at the head of everything, or the queen at that time, who was going to give them the prestige of being an empire ruling over, in their case, South America, Cuba, and they would be the ones that destroyed the hated American Republic on behalf of the English-speaking white races. The American Republic doesn't fit into that. It says all men are created equal. They had slavery, but it's the slave-owning element that made this war, to purify it so that it's only the slave-owning element. That's it. So you wipe out the ideals of the founding of the country.
Yeah.
So,
and that was really made explicit. Oh, sorry, that was really made explicit by both Sam LaBriere in his former presentation and our mutual friend Magdalena as well, Therrien, in a presentation that she gave on a similar topic a few months back, that the Teutonic Aryan mythos was so heavily promoted and believed in by the Teddy Roosevelt networks and Adamses as well. They were all so saturated by this elitist racism, where they believed that it was sort of in God's plan somehow for their. Oh, you will? Okay, I'll just back up.
I'm going to give you the quotes from.
All right.
So you see this from his own mouth. Right. But the thing that's generally missing from the way history has been given to us is the relationship to the British directly, and to the entire sweep of history on the policy of imperialism versus the policy of nationalism within the United States. The nationalist and humane elements of U.S. policy and outlook are missing. It's all just, here's this guy and he's a racist, just like the Southern were racist and Northern mobs rioting against blacks are racist. So America's racist. They killed the Indians. That's all there is to it. And according to Teddy Roosevelt, that's all there is to it. But the history tells us otherwise. That's not the character of the leadership that actually built the country. Now, this is a big log in the mouth of the crocodile. He can't bite through that. That history, once that history is out there, you have a terrible problem in upholding imperialism in the world, because there's an alternative, and the alternative is there throughout all history. You have that choice all the time. And by the laws of forgiveness and redemption, which are in the cosmos, you have that choice today. So,
and just quick, when you read the writings of many of those who have today emerged into positions of influence, and have really tried to co-opt the mega movement around Trump, and here I'm referring directly to Peter Thiel, who has been promoting for many, many years a restoration of protectionism and a
Yeah.
certain type of perverse nationalism. But when you read his writings, like his the Straussian Moment that he wrote in 2007, in his philosophy of how how America prospered and grew, it was always by a Hobbesian imposition of the will, and the application of injustice to the weak was necessary to create every stage of progress in his revisionism.
Well,
So what you're saying
yeah.
is so important to redefine that that was absolutely not necessary, that progress happened in spite of this disgusting thing, not because of it.
It's important just to think of the of nationalism as a principle
Mhm.
of self-government. When this coup d'état and this war, 1898, was put through, the principle of nationalism was abandoned. That what's the principle? It's a universal principle. You're for nationalism, for other countries' nationalism as well as your own, because you're in opposition. You're in a joint opposition to the other system, which is oppressing you and everyone else. It's very simple if you dare to think that way. And that's what the American revolutionaries did, and that's what Lincoln did. That's what FDR did, despite the way Republicans who think that they're in some sort of conservative tradition going back to Lincoln, and they have Teddy Roosevelt in the middle of their thinking. They've lost the whole thing. They've lost their minds. They don't know the history. So let me go on here. Just I'll mention these other people quickly. John Hay, who was Secretary of State for McKinley and then for Teddy Roosevelt, was he had been the private secretary, one of the two private secretaries for President Lincoln, and betrayed everything Lincoln stood for in his not very long after he left Lincoln. I haven't studied him intensively enough in his biography to know what happened. I kind of think that this was in reserve in his character all along, but uh, he became a real, just a fawning would-be member of the oligarchy as in his view, as opposed to the filthy, dirty people of the country and the world. That's what, and he is also used by this clique that did the coup d'état with Teddy Roosevelt. He's used by them as a figurehead for even though he's an Anglophile snob, he's used as a figurehead because of his association with Lincoln during the Civil War. Then you have Henry Adams. I've treated him extensively in volume 2 of the book series Who We Are, also in the treason book. He was the son of the American ambassador to England during the Civil War. So he's well aware of Bullock and all this stuff. He knows a lot. Uh, and he studies it after he's over there. He's a young man when he's over in England. And his father, Charles Francis Adams, is the son of President John Quincy Adams. And Henry Adams is horribly embarrassed by his grandfather, John Quincy Adams. His bad poetry, his insipid Bible reading, his American nationalism, when everyone knows that America's not, is vulgar, and the British aristocracy are the lords that are worthy to be looked on as semi gods. He and they hate industry. Not all of them hate industry, but this is the set and the point of view. They hate the rise of the common people and the wrong races to challenge the established order, and they're intense enemies and of people who are not in this set of Jews, I don't know, Catholics, and it's very complicated as you get into this because it's such has a very diseased mind, diseased relationships with women and so forth. But he is the teacher of both Henry Cabot Lodge and Theodore Roosevelt at Harvard. Uh, and he's a conscious traitor, and he's worried about people finding out about his point of view during the Civil War. Americans finding this out. Henry Cabot Lodge, I deal with him extensively in his family rather in the treason book.
Mhm.
His I guess his grandfather Cabot it would be George Cabot. And the whole family, Cabot, Higginson, Lowell's an intermarried blob of Boston Brahmins. They were in the opium trafficking. They're in slave trafficking. George Cabot was the head of the Hartford Convention, treason during the period of the War of 1812. And really, the Boston Brahmins families, typified by Lodge and his antecedents, are traitors against civilization. And
Yeah.
this is how you have to look at the British Empire itself as the summation of that treason. It doesn't start in England. It
Yeah.
starts in the continent. It starts with Rome, with Venice, with other antecedents. But this is conscious uh, uh, direction of the country and of the world back to the time when you didn't have this problem of nation states and idealism in a large proportion of mankind.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, because it took me a while to realize the importance of the Hartford Convention as well. That was an 1814 convention that was taking place in the middle of the War of 1812, which went on for till I think 1815 or 1816. But this convention basically was the big solution to solve the problem of the war or not even solve the problem of the war, solve the problem of like the slave free dichotomization of the nation that still had slaves. And basically, the idea was to just break up the nation, undo the Constitution, undo the War of 1776, and create two separate confederations where the northern free states would essentially integrate into the British Empire, the possessions of Canada, and then the slave states would go and do their own thing as a slave empire. And that was basically, and you're saying that that was George Cabot who was overseeing that Hartford Convention that was calling
Yeah,
for that,
it was
right?
very unsuccessful. It was terribly unpopular with the population and with other countries. So Teddy Roosevelt, as we get into what we're talking about here, had a direct relationship, rather, I should say, indirect relationship with the King of England, Edward VII, uh, through intermediaries, but not professional diplomats. He had his own intermediaries, uh, Henry White and other people, personal emissaries, and also his close British friend, Sir Cecil Spring Rice, who was his best man at his wedding. And these are people that are psychologically profiling Teddy Roosevelt. Uh, I deal with this in depth in the Treason book, Treason in America, from Aaron Burr to Averell Harriman. So when the United States went into uh, the let me get back to this. Wait a minute. I'm gonna tell you about the coup d'état first of all. No, the next step is to say what's the attitude? What's the British point of view about this coup d'état? First of all, um, okay, hold on. H.G. Wells, British strategist at the beginning of the 20th century, uh, is a sort of horrified student of the United States, watching the U.S. Republic destroy the British Empire and its influence in the world by what? By increasing the industrial power of the United States and spreading nationalism in favor of self-industrialization to other countries like Germany, Russia, Japan, trying to spread it to China and many other countries. So H.G. Wells wrote in 1903, in a sense, the British system, the pyramid of king, landowning and land-ruling aristocracy, the middle class and laborers, that pyramid is dead. It died in the 19th century under the wheels of mechanism. So with what philosophy should the empire and its American friends led by Teddy Roosevelt act in response to that American threat to the British Empire? What philosophy should this whole gang in London and Boston and down in Washington, who are enemies of the US Republic, with what philosophy should this international clique work to extinguish the political, industrial, and cultural qualities and to squash the dangerously awakened higher aspirations of common people? So Wells described how they should build the new republic. He called it the new republic. They should act from the standpoint of absolute evil in order to hold on to power. And I'm going to quote now. They must, quote, reject and set aside all abstract and refined ideas such as right, liberty, happiness, duty, or beauty, and hold fast to the assertion of the fundamental nature of life as merely a succession of births. Now for this coup d'etat. This occurred in 3 steps. The first step was the war. McKinley was not pressured to surrender directly to Britain. Rather, they forced him to agree to an evil action that would redefine the nature of the USA, an American war of conquest against Spain to grab Cuba and the Philippines in 1898. This would nullify the Republican nationalism of our past that built the country and would switch us over to empire. You're abandoning the principle of nationalism, which is for us and other countries, and you replace that with the principle of imperialism, which is for us with the British over other countries which are to have nothing. And so the first step is the war. As Sam Labriere went through, this was forced through against McKinley's very dramatic and heartfelt, and you know, he was in tears about this. Against his opposition to this war, he finally gave into it to basically to hold on to the government. The second step was when McKinley was running for president again for his second term in 1900, the Republican convention, I believe it was in Philadelphia, forced McKinley to take on his deepest enemy in the Republican Party, Teddy Roosevelt, as the vice presidential running mate. In the first term, he had a different vice president who died in office, Hobart. And now you don't have a vice president in office, so you're going to have to select somebody. And they selected the worst enemy of McKinley as the vice president. What they did at the convention, I'll be developing this for the volume 3, was that they threatened to change the rules of procedure in the Republican convention unless McKinley agreed to take Teddy Roosevelt on as his vice president. And the rules they were referring to were those that allowed that function to have black people in the South have voting at the convention, have their own, have representatives at the convention. So they threatened to take away this margin. Black people were one of the main support elements for McKinley. He's a pro-civil rights man, and an officer, and impassioned officer in the Civil War on the Union side, pro-labor man. And so they said, you take Teddy Roosevelt on, or we're going to take away the vote of the black delegates. There's not going to be any representation. You won't be president again. So they put together this absurd electoral ticket of McKinley and his enemy Roosevelt. They won the election. Teddy Roosevelt at that time was governor of New York. He had earlier pushed for this war, and then he was famous in putting together his own regiment and storming up the hill in Cuba. And then as soon as he, then he got to be the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and he had sent the ships out to start the war as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, as Sam pointed out, when the Secretary of Navy was away from his desk. So first the war, then putting McKinley or Teddy Roosevelt on the ticket, and then the third step is the assassination of the president, which took place a few months after the electoral ticket of McKinley and Roosevelt was elected. Mm-hmm. So a few months after they were inaugurated, rather. McKinley's killer, Leon Czolgosz, Czolgosz, was active in the anarchist movement headquartered in London. Emma Goldman was her base was London. She lived with a family there, and this is a family, a fairly aristocratic British family. They were in the pre-Raphaelite movement. This family, famous at the time.
The Ruskinites.
No, not Ruskin. It was the painters. The poet. I'm sorry, the poet.
Oh, Rossetti or Dante?
Yeah, Rossetti. Yeah, one of the Rossetti family maintained this household. His daughters were in this movement. I think it was a brother of the other Rossetti. This guy was a government official.
And she was also, I remember from an article that you had written many years ago, I think it was you, that she was also a member of the Neo-Malthusian League and had Bertrand Russell sponsor her at a certain point.
Emma Goldman?
Emma Goldman, yeah.
Yeah, but that's not the point I'm making, not the philosophy. The point I'm making here is that this is a British imperial project to sponsor anarchism in that home of Rossetti, where Emma Goldman is British government officials' home. They published this newspaper. I think it was called Spark.
Yeah.
And that's the newspaper of the anarchist movement. And so she's a leader for American anarchists, but also there was so this guy Czolgosz murdered President McKinley in 1901, getting Teddy as president. Earlier, a British-based anarchist, a Spanish anarchist, but who was in London as part of the British anarchist movement in London. He went from England to Spain and killed the Prime Minister of Spain in 1897 as part of starting up this whole process of getting the war between the United States and Spain. Now, previous to this coup d'etat, the London financier cartel was already taking control over American industries, colleges, newspapers, both political parties. These were people who constituted a self-appointed American high society. They imitated British manners. Their British tutors, they said, must accept them as equals. And they brought into their clubs the Southern white slave masters who had lost the war against the the Union. So this is already going on from around 1880, really for 1870s. But this coup d'état cemented this whole group into power. Teddy Roosevelt proceeded away from the sight of the public as president uh, to have this relationship with the king to set up the intelligence service in the United States and the intelligence service in England along new lines to prepare for a great war, which was advocated by both of these guys, the king and the so-called American Teddy Roosevelt. Everything was done privately with the king. All diplomacy was back channel. The American public viewed the British Empire as the enemy of the world and of America.
What
So
form of you're saying that that Teddy's networks and the king directly played a role in setting up a new intelligence agency in America at that time?
yes, I'm gonna go through that process. It's
Okay,
very, it just take me a minute to do that.
sure. All right.
So uh, here's Teddy Roosevelt's point of view. He explicitly repudiated the Declaration of Independence. He wrote in a review of Houston Stewart Chamberlain's book. It's called The Foundations of the 19th Century. Teddy Roosevelt wrote, much that Chamberlain says regarding the loose and sloppy talk about the general progress of humanity, the equality and identity of races, is not only perfectly true, that is what Chamberlain is saying about it, but is emphatically worth considering by a generation, such as Teddy Roosevelt's generation, accustomed as its forefathers were accustomed to accept as true and useful thoroughly pernicious doctrines taught by well-meaning and feeble-minded sentimentalists, unquote. Talking about George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and so forth.
Wow.
He claimed to hate Thomas Jefferson because of the Declaration of Independence. He claimed to love George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Of course, wouldn't he say that? Especially Lincoln. He had photographs and portraits of Lincoln all around.
Right.
Because his family had helped to murder Lincoln.
Well, it reminds me a little bit in Montreal where there's John F. Kennedy Street that was named after he was murdered, and it's got a head of John F. Kennedy, an ugly head that looks sad, that's melting in bronze. It's a pathetically scary statue of what you would imagine he looks like, if he was in hell,
Yeah.
perpetually melting. And people think, oh, what an honorable memorial to JFK. And it's like, no, when you actually know that history, that's more of a trophy.
Yeah.
That's not a memorial.
That was also a secret thing that was done.
Yeah.
That relationship between the British military and intelligence and the Confederacy, the people in Canada didn't really know about that.
No.
The ordinary people there did not admire the Confederacy in any way.
Hmm.
So most of the people. So Teddy Roosevelt said that the English-speaking peoples must supervise alien races. He said at Oxford in 1910, in the long run, there can be no justification for one race managing or controlling another, unless the management and control are exercised in the interest and for the benefit of that other race. That is what our peoples have done and must continue to do in India, Egypt, and the Philippines.
What a golden soul.
All right, now, what is the direct outcome of this war in the Philippines? A regime was set up there modeled on British tyranny in India and Ireland, explicitly modeled on that. That was the research done for it. And I'm going to give you a quote from Alfred McCoy's useful book, Policing America's Empire, the U.S., the Philippines, and the Rise of the Surveillance State, 2009 book, McCoy. Quote, in the Philippines, there were, quote, 5 separate secret services with spies and agents in a ceaseless surveillance of Filipino leaders and their private lives, media monitoring, psychological profiling, disinformation, penetration, manipulation, assassination. Armed resistance was met with mass slaughter by artillery and repeating rifles, unquote. So the methods that were set up and tested out in the Philippines, like having a card, an index card, for notes on every single active person in the population of the Philippines, massive system. That system was brought back to the United States and set up as the predecessor agency, the Bureau of Investigation, which would later become called the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It began in 1906 under Teddy Roosevelt. It was set up as a secret police over the U.S. population, and particularly against the political system, the Congress. This surveillance and dirt collection and blackmail, first against the Congress, people in the Congress that were objecting to the imperial policy and saying that it was a scam run on behalf of the financiers. At the same time, Teddy's partner, King Edward VII, remodeled British intelligence, setting up, in effect, the modern British system of these different things, which becomes the MI5 and MI6, to prepare for the World War. King Edward VII died in 1910. The war came on soon afterwards. And in conjunction with that war, the United States went whole hog into this British system, setting up the Federal Reserve system, setting up the income tax, which is largely a system of surveillance over the population, right, for personal finances and things, and setting up the system of U.S. foreign wars. In 1911, in preparation for a war, MI6 officer Claude Dancy, Claude Dansey, he actually came over here a few years earlier. In 1911, he was in Washington, but before that, he was hired by a group of millionaires in the Sleepy Hollow Country Club in north of New York City, Rockefeller family predominantly. They hired him as the secretary of the club, and they really revered him as a British aristocrat. And then he went into Washington, and he had an office in Washington. In 1911, he set up what was called military intelligence for the United States. He organized the 1911.
1911? Okay.
So this is the predecessor of Allen Dulles' CIA. And importantly,
is that what became the Black Chamber, or
yes,
is that something different?
Yeah,
that was the Black Chamber?
Yeah.
Right, because the Black Chamber becomes the NSA in 1930, right? So that it takes on that name.
I don't know. Let's not take it. Let's just talk about what the concept is here and what the history that I know about, and this is very well documented and demonstrated.
I was just gonna say that because and I'll let you jump on.
Black Chamber, yes, but don't give me the whole thing.
No, the whole thing. Just the one association I wanted to add in there was that it was Marlborough Churchill who was the head of the Black Chamber, right?
Yeah, he was trained by the second leader of this thing. Yeah. So this intelligence service, for so-called military intelligence, led by the guy, his name escapes me now, who had been running this intelligence service in the Philippines. This so-called military intelligence, I say so-called because it's not run by U.S. generals or the military, amalgamated with the government intelligence service the Morgan and Rockefeller interests in New York, the banks that they controlled, and certain allied corporations had their own intelligence units that spied and had contacts all over the world and within our country and in other countries. And really, is there anything wrong with private interests having their own attempt to have intelligence? There's nothing per se that's wrong with that. What's wrong with that is that these people are at war with the United States. They're trying to turn the country into this race-based alliance with the British Empire. And the government of the United States incorporates these private interests as part of the national governance that's governing the country. It's not just for doing intelligence on some foreign people. This is how you're governing our country and its people. That's what's wrong. The model for this is Shelburne and Baring. I have that in volume 1. In the second chapter, I go into this in detail, what the new British intelligence was and what their false flag stuff into France was, what's their philosophy, how they worked together, and what they thought about the United States and its destiny as a real enemy. So Roosevelt then and his clique prefigured Hitler. And this is true of all three of these guys, Lodge, the Adams brothers, or Henry Adams and his brothers, and Teddy Roosevelt himself. They all have deeply Hitlerian ideas. They set up the Immigration Restriction League based on completely on racial notions. And unlike know-nothings in the United States who simply scream about immigrants and don't have any concept of what's going on in the other countries, why would you not want to improve life in the other countries where the immigrants come from? These people had the explicit idea that those countries should be crushed and in chaos all the time. And so this is total Hitlerian ideology, and that became the idea for the project. It didn't come from America. It was developed in conjunction with ideologues and leaders in Britain and elsewhere, but Britain in particular. But the British plan was to crush Russia and Germany, to militarize Japan. Teddy Roosevelt bought into that completely. Teddy Roosevelt was thrilled that the British set up a navy for Japan to keep Russia out of the Pacific. And as was pointed out, as I pointed out in volume 2, the plan of the British and for Japan was that they would keep Russia and the U.S. out of the Pacific. Teddy Roosevelt just said, "Well, this is great because it's going to stop Russia, and Japan should be militarized, not a force for progress in Asia." Anyway, so I'm going to conclude with this this quote from Teddy Roosevelt, so you get the idea and what happened to the world. This is from his book, The Winning of the West, published, I guess it was written around 1890. I forget the exact date. Published several editions later on. Teddy says, "The most ultimately righteous of all wars is a war with savages, though it is apt to be also the most terrible and inhuman. The rude, fierce settler who drives the savage from the land lays all civilized mankind under debt to him." He cites the Americans and the native Indians. He cites the Boers and the Zulus. He cites the Cossacks and the Tartars, the New Zealanders and the Maoris. "In each case," says Teddy Roosevelt, "the victor, horrible though many of his deeds are, has laid deep the foundations for the future greatness of a mighty people. This is primeval warfare, where no pity is shown to non-combatants. where the weak and the vanquished are maltreated with merciless ferocity. A sad and evil feature is that the whites, the representatives of civilization, speedily sink almost to the level of their barbarous foes. Now concentrate on this next phrase. There follow deeds of enormous, of incredible, of indescribable horror. And then he says, it matters little whether Lorraine is part of Germany or of France, but it is of incalculable importance that America, Australia, and Siberia should pass out of the hands of their red, black, and yellow Aboriginal owners and become the heritage of the dominant world races. Theodore Roosevelt. Now, let me point out that after Franklin Roosevelt repudiated the policies of his fifth cousin, Teddy Roosevelt, during the 1920s and as president, he was for the good neighbor, not the bullying. And after, then you had Truman, who brought back the concepts and image of Teddy Roosevelt. Then you had John Kennedy, who again was for the good neighbor and anti-imperial. And after that, you have the American presidents in this period of globalism, which coincides completely with Teddy Roosevelt. And they have, well, there's one thing called the Roosevelt Room in the White House. Now, who'd they named that after? Well, they named it after, supposedly, both Roosevelts. Nixon said, oh, well, it's really about the two of them. He didn't want to just say it's about Teddy. So, and remember, he's not long after JFK is killed. Then you have, and so supposedly Republican presidents would hang a portrait of Teddy Roosevelt in that room. And Democratic presidents would hang a picture of FDR. Not Bill Clinton. He's a Democrat, and he, instead of FDR, he put the picture of Theodore Roosevelt up. Same thing with Barack Obama. Barack Obama put the picture in his office. And then you have poor Donald Trump, who was hanged, or he should have hanged Teddy Roosevelt, I'm sorry, hung the portrait of Teddy Roosevelt in his office, I think in the cabinet office. And the ignorance of such an act is demonstrable, because he's lurching back and forth for and slightly against the imperial policy of war. War itself, foreign wars of butchery, of savagery, of imposed starvation, like's going on in Palestine now.
Yeah.
Doesn't do anybody any good to say, no, it's not happening. That's Hamas propaganda. Nobody really believes that. And if you did, get foreign observers in there, not the Israeli army, to figure it out. This is an American project, but is it American? Well, it's in line with Teddy Roosevelt. Everything that should be known to Americans is that this is not an American project. It's not a civilization project. It's a project of the devil, namely the British Empire and that element within world affairs that is the enemy of mankind, and that usurped power over our country, beginning largely with the coup d'etat that installed Teddy Roosevelt as our president.
That was very, very powerful, Anton, and I think a very, very timely reminder of the essentials of our universal history that people need to internalize fast. And you made this very easy by providing this thumbnail sketch, but at the same time, hopefully, people watching this, you sitting out there, whoever you are watching this, are going to be inspired to do the heavy lifting now and dive into Anton's writings. He's written his discoveries in the form of two recent books, Who We Are, America's Fight for Universal Progress, Volumes 1 and Volumes 2, and an earlier available book that I highly recommend, Treason in America, that was written over 35 years ago, that's still available online. These are essential readings for people who need to really understand and fight to get their nation back. Now, I'll just add before we close it off, we'll have a little back and forth, but there's a few thoughts that entered my mind listening to you. Number one, the New Republic that you mentioned, H.G. Wells,
Yeah.
the sick mind of H.G. Wells was calling for, right? As like a new type of nation founded upon the principle of evil. And in his writings, he says here, the men of the New Republic will not be squeamish in facing or inflicting death because they will have a fuller sense of the possibilities of life than we possess. What the hell does that mean? But he goes in depth as a eugenicist, talking about the need for the strong to exterminate the weak. He also says, I hate common humanity, this oafif crowd which tramples the ground whence my cloud-cramped pinnacles might rise. I am tired of humanity beyond measure. Take it away. Clear the earth of them. That was from his Star Begotten. He has a character that speaks with his sort of spirit. Say this. Now, I'm just saying this because the New Republic magazine, I was Googling it while you were talking a little bit, is directly inspired by H.G. Wells' ideas of the New Republic. And on their Wikipedia website, the New Republic was set up in 1914, and it became a major propaganda voice for getting America to let go of its nationalist problems, let's just say, and mesh itself into World War I and become more interventionist, both domestic and foreign. They say on the Wikipedia site that it was founded in Teddy Roosevelt's living room. And heading it with that's literally with the meeting that set this thing up. Yeah. And it was Walter Lippmann, the guy who was running the Fabian Society branch in America, who's running this thing. Which is also, he's the guy working with the Rhodes Milner Roundtable Group and setting up the Council on Foreign Relations in America,
they're
right?
Contemptuous, by the way. All of these characters like Lippmann and I think Henry Adams for sure, but certainly Wells and these higher up British are contemptuous of Teddy Roosevelt. He's a fool. He's not just a bully, but he's clearly a weak personality who blusters, and then he's learned a few things about how to move tides of people, and how to what he thinks ingratiate himself. Some of this correspondence that Teddy Roosevelt has with King Edward should have been embarrassing. Like, he sends him his book, Winning of the West. It's a stupid book. This is all there is to America, is that we killed the Indians. This shows what America's all about. Is that all there was? The king loved it. The King of England loved that book. So they're contemptuous of this guy. So go ahead. But, Wells and this New Republic, Walter Lippmann is a cynical man, right? He's an oligarch. And
Absolutely.
so he's looking at this president who's a foolish, immature personality and is delivering his country into the jaws of Satan.
Yes. Now, on top of that, so based on what you just said there, so we have the Cecil Rhodes theme. Now, Claude Dancy, before he's brought in by the Rockefellers and he sets up, American intelligence, and he's the second in command of what becomes MI5. This guy is actually cutting his teeth in learning his killing techniques and social engineering techniques in South Africa in the Boer War, right? So he's actually on the ground there.
And then in Asia.
And then in Asia, So he's developing his networking skills, let's just say.
He was in Africa.
Working with the Belgians and Leopold's networks, doing some terrible genocidal stuff in Africa there. Sorry, and just one more thing is that, so you have the Cecil Rhodes, again, the Milner Rhodes group, which is like overseeing the genocide of
that's right,
in Africa. The same thing, you have Theodore Herzl, right? Theodore Herzl is an admirer of Cecil Rhodes, and he's writing letters telling Cecil Rhodes how he's inspired by Rhodes's writings as this guy is formulating a concept of, creating this state where they're going to try to convince all the Jews of the world to go and live in the desert. But Herzl, he's like a secular, non-religious Jewish guy, but he's an admirer, he's an imperialist first. He admires the Rhodes dream and the Rhodes technique, which has a lot in common with the worst aspects of what Teddy Roosevelt admires about the white race spreading itself over the
Yeah.
inferior races in their perverse idea of manifest destiny. That's kind of like the perverse idea of manifest destiny that's also being spawned. Again, Milner is helping to write the Balfour Accords that's setting the stage for that later on. So you have this common sick ideology everywhere you look, in Africa, in the Middle East, in
Yeah.
America, but it's
Let
all the
me
same thing.
let
Yeah,
me
sorry.
close this with a more positive note of
No, no,
this.
no, no. Wait. One
All
last
right, go
one. One
ahead.
last one. One last one. Bill Clinton's a Rhodes Scholar, right? So the fact that you have this guy
Yes,
also
that's right.
by
No, you're
Teddy
right.
Roosevelt's picture and then set the stage for a new Crusader operation that happens right as he's leaving, but he sets the stage for that new shift of a Crusader ethos into the Middle East, is probably also not a coincidence either. That's
And
again
bombing the
this
Balkans.
and bombing the Balkans. Yeah. So now I'll shut up and just throw it at you.
All right, so let me conclude with a story that people that have followed my work have heard probably quite a few times. I love this story, and I haven't seen the whole thing portrayed by others, so it'll be in volume 3. So going into the 1920 elections after World War I, our country wanted peace, and the Republican candidate was Warren Harding. I guess he was governor of Ohio. And his supporters, many of his supporters were old Lincoln people. One of his people that he met with when he was president was Robert Lincoln, son of Abraham. He dedicated the Lincoln Memorial as when Harding was president. Anyway, he has a terrible reputation by the globalists as president. But going into the 1920 elections, some of his well-connected supporters, particularly a guy named Edward Doheny, an oil man in California, and some of his friends, sent an emissary to the new Soviet Union on behalf of the incoming administration's policies. And so I think this is just before the election that elected Harding, and it was pretty well known that he would be elected because people were sick of the World War I and the Wilson policies. And this guy who was an engineer met with Lenin, then the leader of the Soviet Union. They just established this communist dictatorship over there. And they proposed to Lenin that the United States and Russia, Soviet Russia, regardless of communism, should set up a de facto, not an alliance per se, but to work together very closely strategically. But before they got into the details of their proposal, Lenin said to this emissary, "How's the revolution going in America?" He thought he could just try, and maybe these people are pro-communist or something, sympathetic to the working class. And the guy said, "Let's get one thing straight. If you communists try to take action in our country against our form of government, we will hang those people as traitors." And so Lenin said, "Okay, let's go on to the next point of the agenda." And so what they proposed to him is that the United States provide capital goods, primarily locomotives, but clearly other kinds of equipment to industrialize Russia, to help in the process of really continuing the industrialization of Russia that was interrupted by the Russian Revolution. And in return for these very needed pieces of equipment, that the Soviet Russia would provide a naval base for the United States on the peninsula in the Pacific. What's that called? The shoot.
Oh. Yeah,
You know, the one that's
I'm having a blank too.
Whatever it is, the Sea of Okhotsk is next to that.
Yeah.
So we would have a naval base there to counter the British-Japanese alliance of the time. This proposal was accepted by Lenin. And the whole deal was going to go forward under the presidency of Harding. The presidency ended dramatically and mysteriously by the death of the president from really unknown causes while he was on a speaking tour in the West in 1923. And then the posthumous scandalizing of that administration as a terrible offense against the country. Now, to the final point here, H.G. Wells, while this whole thing was in process, H.G. Wells wrote an article, submitted an article to the New York Times, or it was given to the New York Times, was published in the New York Times, H.G. Wells' article, that said that the Americans were duping Lenin. And they were trying to make him believe a fairy tale. The Americans were trying to put across this completely illogical idea that Russia, a backward country, could be electrified, this peasant country. And Lenin was falling for it. And this was very dangerous. You know, these are very upsetting ideas, stupid ideas. And that's it's not only what this British strategist said, but it was clearly something in the minds of the New York Times to publish that. New York Times, a pro-British outlet all throughout its history.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little story about, Republicans, conservatives, and liberals, people of goodwill. Maybe they're few and far between, I don't know, or maybe it's just a matter of education, but they should be proud of the good that we've done, even on behalf of people that you have been told you're not supposed to consider as worthy of even inquiry, like President Harding. The same thing was true of Trump. And it's been up to Trump to decide which side he's on. And the wars are going on. They're getting the war in Israel is with her neighbors is getting worse. How many? Where would that end? What would be the end of that war? There is, by definition, there's no end to it. You'd have to take on and destroy every country that defies globalism, really, Muslim and otherwise, in order to, quote, keep Israel safe. Israel is not safe by that you're increasing the danger every minute that you murder people in some other country.
Yeah.
Every time an Israeli soldier commits suicide as a result of this insanity, you're increasing the danger to the world, including Israel. And the United States is the sponsor of this, guided by Britain. The combined intelligence services of all of these countries, Britain, United States, and Israel, run this project for escalation. Despite, what's her name? Tulsi Gabbard or Kash Patel or anybody sitting in Washington.
Yeah.
The combination of these intelligence service, covert services, military corrupted elements, they're aiming at escalation. And this escalation has that completely chilling point of view that I pointed out from H.G. Wells, that has absolutely no thought about human beings. None.
Hmm.
And if you challenge that, if you think that's exaggerated, you have to get some blood in your veins and think about what needs to be investigated, what needs to be done to stand up for what people want and need, which is progress. They want that, they deserve it, we deserve it, people in the other countries deserve it on every side of these conflicts. So I have to go now, but I really appreciate you taking all this time. This is uh, quite a big subject.
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah,
man.
no, I think we used our time well. Thank you, Anton. And like I said, check the links in the description box. And I do want to have a future chat with you to peel back a little bit more of the Empire of the Golden Circle, and also B'nai B'rith. We kind of want to see how there's a bunch of paradoxes that I want you to help me resolve in my head about those two agencies and their enduring effects, because there's some weirdness there. But if you're okay with that, at some point down the line, I'd like to hash that out with you.
I am, but I warn you that I might have a somewhat different take on these things than in some of my earlier writings. Not a different philosophy, but just a different overview
Okay.
of the what things you have to consider.
Yeah, okay. All right,
Okay.
sure.
All right.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.